Hi guys, how are you? I'm Robbie and I'm bringing you another English idiomatic expression to learn, to memorize and use in your daily conversations and self-practice sessions. And today's phrase is rather a collocation, and it is sufficient information. And this is a typical collocation. It's not a phrase in the common sense, because commonly by a word phrase you would typically understand phrases like by no means, or it's easier said than done, or you may want to, or typical idioms such as barking up the wrong tree, beating your head against brick wall, or beating around the bush and until cows come home and things like that, you know. But in this case, this phrase is a typical collocation, and collocation represents a word group, two or more English words that normally go together in a native-like speech. So basically, this is how native speakers and obviously smart foreign speakers would describe this or that particular thing. And in this case, sufficient information is a way of, just another way of saying enough information. But when you say sufficient information, it sounds smart, it sounds native-like, and you create an impression about yourself that you can speak just like native speaker. So you may want to repeat this phrase, this collocation, many times over. Sufficient information, sufficient information, sufficient information. And then the next time you'll be wanting to say something about that involves enough information, you will automatically use this collocation, sufficient information. You'll just spit it out of your mouth without much thinking, without any thinking at all for that matter, because if it's become your second nature, it's a fully automated speech process and you won't be even thinking. You will just have a slight notion of what you want to say, and then the two-word combination will just pop out of your mouth, you know, sufficient information. And you may want to come up with some sample phrases to use in your daily conversations and self-practice sessions. And let me tell you a few sample sentences on my own, you know. Let's see, sufficient information. So there you go. Before drawing conclusions, one must obtain sufficient information, because without sufficient information, you cannot draw to conclusions. You'll be just jumping to conclusions, which is another English idiomatic expression actually, which implies that you'll be just guessing something, and what you conclude is not necessarily going to be the truth, because you won't have all necessary information at your disposal. So this is actually another way of saying sufficient information, all the necessary information, you know. So basically, if you want to draw the right conclusions, first of all, you must obtain sufficient information. And let me think of another example, another sample sentence. Okay, there you go. In order to pass any test, whatever the area of that test is, whether it's maths or geography or chemistry or history, or a test of a practical nature such as a driving test or whatever, in order to pass any test, you must have sufficient information on top of the necessary skill set, you know. But if it's a test of a purely theoretical nature, right, then information plays the major role in the whole thing, right? And you must have sufficient information in order to be capable of passing that test, whatever the case may be, you know. So this is another example. To pass a test, you need sufficient information, which is obtained over a longer period of time during your studies at school or self-studies, you know, depending on the nature of the test and nature of the test topic, the test subject, to be more specific. But that's another way of using this collocation, sufficient information. And to bring this video to an end, we have to come up with another example. And why I'm aiming for 3 sample sentences in each and every one of these idiomatic expression videos is because I believe that you as a foreigner, we're both foreigners, right? But I believe that you must have sufficient information in terms of how to use this or that particular phrase, so that you can wrap your head around the whole thing and see how each phrase would be used in many different situations, so that you can see the things in broader perspective, and that way it'll make it much easier for you to understand how those phrases are used, and you can so much more successfully use them in your daily conversations and self-practice sessions. So basically, this was the last example sentence. You must have sufficient information in terms of how to use this collocation, which is sufficient information, and I hope that by now you've gotten quite a clear picture on how this collocation is used. So basically, whenever you want to say enough information or necessary information, you can replace that with the two-word combination sufficient information, and repeat it many times over: sufficient information, sufficient information. And if this word sufficient is the first time you actually hear this word, or you might have actually heard it before, but it's not part of your active vocabulary. And active vocabulary describes a vocabulary you can actually actively use in your speech. Words you can say, as opposed to words you can only understand, which is your passive vocabulary, right? So basically, if you haven't been using this word sufficient in your speech this far, you may want to use this word only as part of this collocation, and that's good enough. This is one of the biggest, probably, misconceptions of us foreigners. We learn a specific vocabulary word, and then if we just learn a word on its own, and even worse, if we learn it through our native language, that's a definite no-no, right? But if we only learn a specific word, we mightn't have any associations with that word. It's a very general knowledge. We won't know when to use it, how to use it. So if you learn a single individual word, chances are you won't be using it. But if you learn a word in a combination with another word, and that's the whole concept of collocations. Collocate means that something goes together, They are located next to each other. Co-locate, right? So if you learn that new word sufficient in combination with the word information, that's a very great way of using that word, If you only ever use that word in the combination with information, that's good enough. You don't have to perceive new vocabulary acquisition as if learning new vocabulary words means that you have to use them in all possible situations. It's going to be too overwhelming. Your brain just won't be able to handle it, because all those words will be kind of swarming in your brain. They'll be popping up in your mind, and you'll be translating from your native language, trying to use those words, and more often than not, you'll probably use them inappropriately, because all languages are different, and the word sufficient is used differently in English than it is used in your language. We never have to go by the direct translations. Forget about your language. When I'm speaking in English, I'm speaking in English only, and when I'm saying sufficient information, I don't think in Latvian, which is my native language, at all. Latvian is out the window, I'm speaking only in English. And sufficient information is basically a way you can refer to any information that is enough or it is necessary, basically. So that was it, my friends. I hope that you'll put this knowledge to good use, and see you soon again in another video, whether it's going to be an idiomatic expression video or one of those videos where I'm discussing various issues surrounding English fluency improvement. It remains to be seen, but nonetheless, thanks for staying with me, and I hope you've gained sufficient information in this video as to how to use this particular collocation, sufficient information, and just a little bit more about how to build your English vocabulary and what is the nature of collocations. And yeah, that's about everything I tried to convey to you, my dear friend. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.